Jake Morrison floated in the silence of space, his helmet reflecting the distant stars as he maneuvered his salvage skiff through the graveyard of forgotten ships. 15 years he had worked here in the orbital salvage yards above Earth, and every day brought the same routine of cutting apart alien technology that the Galactic Council had deemed worthless. The younger mechanics called this place the Rust Belt, though most of these vessels had never touched atmosphere or known the kiss of oxidation. Jake preferred it up here where the comm chatter was minimal and the work was honest, even if humanity was treated as little more than janitors for species that had conquered the stars millennia before humans learned to make fire. The infinite horizon appeared on his sensors like a ghost from another era. The Vakrian cruiser had been floating in Sector 7 for nearly a decade according to the salvage logs, abandoned after some battle that nobody bothered to record. The Council's assessment was clear and brutal in its simplicity. Quantum drive cores depleted, hull integrity compromised, total value as scrap materials only. Jake brought his skiff closer and felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in years. The ship was beautiful even in death, with flowing lines that suggested speed and grace, with curves that spoke of a civilization that valued art as much as function. Most mechanics would strip such a vessel for parts over the course of a week and move on to the next job. Jake made a different choice. He accessed the salvage database and found the claim price, 12,000 credits, barely more than a month's wages. His supervisor, Clickroth, a Threxian whose chittering laugh sounded like grinding metal, could not believe the waste when Jake filed the paperwork. Humans were known throughout the galaxy for their strange, sentimental attachments to objects, but this was foolish even by their standards. The ship was dead and would never fly again, yet here was Morrison throwing away his savings for a romantic notion. Jake did not care what Clickroth thought. He sealed the deal and received his claim beacon, which he attached to the Infinite Horizons hull with a satisfaction that was difficult to explain. The ship was his now, every broken corridor and every shattered system. He began spending his off hours exploring the dark interior, pushing through corridors where the emergency lighting had long since failed. The Vakrians had designed the ship for a crew of 30, and their departure had been hasty enough that personal belongings still drifted in the zero gravity. Crystallized drinks floated in the mess hall like strange sculptures, and navigation charts flickered on displays that were slowly dying. The central computer was beyond repair. Its core processors melted from what looked like a deliberate overload. Someone had not wanted this ship to fall into enemy hands intact. But the individual systems told a different story, and Jake had always been good at reading the stories that broken machines told. The power conduits were dark but structurally sound. The engines were cold but not cracked. The weapon systems were locked but not destroyed. This ship was not dead. It was sleeping, waiting for someone stubborn enough to wake it. 6 months passed in a blur of work that consumed every spare moment Jake could find. He could not afford new parts, not on a mechanic's salary, so he learned to improvise in ways that would have made the Vakrian engineers weep. Where their elegant power conduits had failed, he installed human fusion cells that were crude but reliable. Where their quantum navigation system had crashed beyond recovery, he jury-rigged Earth satellite technology that was centuries behind but functional. The ship began to transform under his hands into something that had never existed before. A hybrid that bridged the gap between species that the galaxy insisted were incompatible. The work was dangerous and often seemed impossible. Jake nearly died twice. Once when a power surge sent him flying across the engine room, and once when a containment field failed and exposed him to radiation that should have been lethal. His old pressure suit shielding saved him by mere minutes, but he kept going because something in him recognized that this was more than just repairing a ship. This was proof that humanity deserved better than scraping up after their galactic betters. He fabricated parts in the small machine shop he had built in the Infinite Horizons cargo bay, using scrap metal and salvaged components. He rewired entire decks, replacing Vakrian neural net systems with human computing arrays that were bulkier but more adaptable. He spent 3 weeks just figuring out how to make the artificial gravity generators work with Earth power sources, and another month calibrating them so they would not fluctuate wildly and crush or float anything on board. The other salvage workers began to notice. They would float by in their skiffs and stare at the infinite horizon, seeing lights where there should be only darkness, hearing the hum of generators where there should be only silence. Some thought Jake had gone crazy, obsessed with an impossible dream. Others quietly admired his determination even if they thought he would fail. A few even offered to help, and Jake accepted their assistance with gratitude, though he never let anyone else touch the critical systems. Pete Douglas was the first to truly believe. He was a young engineer fresh from Earth, barely 23 and full of ideas that the older mechanics dismissed as naive. Pete saw what Jake was building and understood it immediately. He started showing up during his off hours, helping with the smaller tasks and asking questions that showed he was actually learning. Jake found himself teaching Pete everything he knew about Vacrian engineering, and in return Pete shared insights about new human technologies that Jake had not kept up with during his years in the yards. The infinite horizon slowly came back to life, deck by deck, system by system. Jake restored life support first, then power distribution, then the engines. Each small victory felt like a battle won against the entire galaxy that had written this ship off as worthless. He worked with a focus that bordered on obsession, sleeping in the ship more often than in his small quarters back at the main station. The ship became his home and his purpose, the physical manifestation of a dream he had not known he carried. 10 months after he had first claimed the infinite horizon, Jake sat in the pilot's chair that he had repaired and modified to fit human proportions. The controls glowed with soft light, human and alien displays side by side. The engines hummed with restrained power. The ship was ready for its first test, ready to prove that impossible was just a word that people used when they gave up too easily. Jake's hands moved over the controls with steady confidence as he prepared to take a dead ship and make it fly. The warning klaxons screamed like dying animals the moment Jake engaged the engines. Every display on the makeshift bridge flashed red as the infinite horizon shuddered violently, its hull groaning under stresses it had not felt in a decade. The artificial gravity went insane, yanking Jake down into his seat with crushing force before suddenly releasing him to float against his restraints. His heart hammered in his chest as he fought to keep control, hands moving across controls that were responding in ways he had not anticipated. The fusion cores were running hot, far hotter than his calculations had predicted, and for 10 terrifying seconds he was certain they would breach and turn him into a brief new star in the orbital yards. Then something clicked. The human systems and Vacrian systems found their rhythm, synchronizing in ways that should not have been possible. The gravity stabilized at Earth normal. The klaxons fell silent one by one. The engines settled into a steady thrumming that Jake could feel through his boots. He let out a breath he had not realized he was holding and pushed the throttle forward with a hand that trembled slightly. The infinite horizon lurched forward into open space, moving under its own power for the first time in 10 years. Jake kept the first flight short, just a simple loop around the salvage yard's perimeter. The ship handled differently than he had expected, more responsive in some ways and sluggish in others. The human components compensated for Vacrian weaknesses but introduced their own quirks. He made mental notes of every anomaly, every unexpected response, knowing he would need to fine-tune dozens of systems, but none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that he had done it. He had taken a ship the entire galaxy had declared dead and made it fly. News spread through the orbital yards faster than light-speed communications. Within hours, every salvage worker knew that the crazy human in Sector 7 had actually gotten his derelict Vacrian cruiser working. Most dismissed it as a fluke, a brief moment before the ship tore itself apart. Clickrath summoned Jake to the administrative hub, fully prepared to revoke his salvage license for unsafe operations, but when the Threxian pulled up the sensor readings, her mandibles clicked in confusion. The data showed the infinite horizon performing at 40% of its original rated capacity. For a vessel that had been certified as permanently inoperable, this should not have been possible. Jake spent the next 3 weeks making improvements and running test flights. Pete became his constant companion, helping to troubleshoot problems and suggesting modifications. They installed better sensor arrays salvaged from a destroyed Earth patrol boat, giving the ship detection capabilities that were crude by Vacrian standards, but better than nothing. They reinforced the hull breaches with Earth-manufactured plates that did not match the original aesthetic, but held pressure. They calibrated the engines until the ship could maintain steady acceleration without overheating. The infinite horizon's true capabilities revealed themselves during an emergency. Call that came in from Sector 12. A Threxian cargo hauler had collided with debris from a controlled demolition, and its engines were failing. The hauler was drifting toward a field of unstable wreckage that would tear it apart. The nearest Council rescue vessel was 40 minutes away. Jake reached the hauler in 12 minutes, using the Infinite Horizons hybrid systems to navigate through debris fields that would have stopped a pure Vacrian or pure human ship. He locked a tow beam onto the hauler and pulled it to safety, the rescued crew chittering their gratitude in their native language. The Galactic Council took notice. 3 weeks after the rescue, an official inquiry arrived at the orbital yards demanding full documentation of the Infinite Horizon and its modifications. Jake provided everything they asked for, knowing they would not like what they found. Human technology integrated into a Vacrian warframe violated at least a dozen regulations about technological contamination. The Council's response came swiftly. They offered to purchase the ship from Jake for 36,000 credits, triple what he had paid, and then scrap it properly to avoid setting a dangerous precedent. Jake refused without hesitation. The ship was not for sale at any price. The Council's bureaucrats made veiled threats about license revocations and safety violations, but Jake had been careful to follow every actual law. He had purchased legal salvage and modified it with technology he owned. They had no legitimate grounds to take the ship, only their discomfort at seeing a human succeed where they had failed. His refusal attracted attention from an unexpected direction. Commander Lisa Hayes of the Earth Defense Initiative contacted Jake through official channels requesting a meeting. Jake knew her by reputation, a career military officer who had been pushing for years to give Earth a real defensive fleet, instead of the handful of outdated patrol boats they were allowed. The Council always denied such requests, claiming humanity was not ready for serious military technology. Lisa saw in Jake's work a chance to change that calculation. She arrived at the orbital yards in an official Earth diplomatic shuttle, bringing with her an authority that made even Click Roth treat Jake with sudden respect. Lisa was in her early 40s with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing and a handshake that could crack walnuts. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She wanted to see the Infinite Horizon and evaluate its capabilities firsthand. Jake took her on a full tour, explaining every modification and every compromise he had made. Lisa listened with the focus of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. She had engineering training herself from her years in Earth's small navy, and she asked questions that showed she grasped both the brilliance and the limitations of his work. When they reached the bridge and Jake showed her the performance data from his test flights, something shifted in her expression. She saw what Jake saw, not just a repaired ship, but a proof of concept. If one mechanic with limited resources could create a functional hybrid warship, what could humanity achieve with proper support and funding? Earth had been begging for technology transfers for decades, always denied, always told they needed to earn their place in the galactic community. But Jake had not asked permission. He had simply taken what was available and made it work. Lisa made Jake an offer that afternoon. The Earth Defense Initiative would sponsor him and claim the Infinite Horizon as an experimental defense vessel under Earth's sovereign rights. It was a legal gray area that would infuriate the Council, but they could not refuse without admitting they saw humanity as second-class citizens. Jake would retain command of the ship, but would receive proper funding and support. In exchange, he would share his methods and help Earth develop its own hybrid shipbuilding program. Jake accepted, knowing it would make him enemies among the Council, but also knowing it was the right thing to do. That evening, he sent a message to Clickroth officially resigning from the orbital salvage yards. The Threxian's response was brief and surprisingly supportive, wishing him luck in his new venture. Even the skeptical supervisor had to admit that Jake had accomplished something remarkable. The Infinite Horizon departed the salvage yards 2 days later, this time with Lisa Hayes aboard as an official observer. They set course for Earth's Luna shipyards, where a team of engineers was already waiting to study Jake's work. As the derelict graveyard fell away behind them, Jake felt a sense of completion. He had saved one ship from oblivion, but maybe, just maybe, he had also saved humanity from being content with scraps. The summons from the Galactic Council arrived exactly 3 weeks after Jake had moved the Infinite Horizon to Luna shipyards. The message was formal and cold, dressed up in diplomatic language that could not hide the threat underneath. Jake Morrison was to present his vessel for official inspection and certification, or his salvage license would be permanently revoked, and the ship would be confiscated as a safety hazard. Lisa Hayes read the message twice before throwing her tablet onto her desk in frustration. They both knew what an inspection meant. Council engineers would tear apart every modification Jake had made and declare them all violations of technological purity laws. Lisa had been expecting this move and already had a counter-strategy prepared. The Earth Defense Initiative would formally claim the Infinite Horizon as an experimental defense vessel operating under Earth's sovereign rights. It was a legal maneuver that exploited a loophole in Council regulations, one that had never been tested because humanity had never built anything worth claiming before. The Council could not refuse without explicitly stating that Earth had no rights to develop its own military technology, which would violate their own charter about sovereign species. The Council's response came within hours, and it was not what either Jake or Lisa expected. They would allow Earth to keep the ship, but they demanded a demonstration of its capabilities. If the Infinite Horizon could pass a standard Council-proving trial, then Earth's claim would be recognized. If it failed, the ship would be confiscated immediately. Lisa wanted to refuse, seeing it as a trap, but Jake understood they had no choice. This was the Council's way of saving face while setting up what they assumed would be a humiliating failure. The proving ground they selected was the Keltar asteroid belt, and Jake felt his stomach sink when he read the location. Every pilot in the galaxy knew about Keltar. The belt's asteroids were charged with residual energy from an ancient supernova, and that energy played havoc with sensors and shields. Navigation through Keltar required specialized equipment that cost millions of credits. Equipment that the Infinite Horizon definitely did not have. Most ships needed 6 to 8 hours to cross the belt safely. The Council was giving Jake one attempt, with their observation ships recording every moment of what they expected to be a spectacular failure. Jake had 1 week to prepare. He brought in Claire Martinez, a navigation specialist from Earth's merchant fleet who had a reputation for finding paths through dangerous space. Claire was 31, compact and intense, with black hair she kept pulled back and eyes that could read a sensor display faster than most people could blink. She spent 2 days studying everything known about the Keltar belt, before announcing that the Council had made a mistake. The charged asteroids that disrupted advanced sensors might actually be easier to track with older, simpler technology. Pete Douglas worked around the clock modifying the sensor arrays, stripping out some of the Vacrian systems and replacing them with even more basic Earth equipment. It seemed backwards using cruder technology for a more difficult task, but Claire's logic was sound. The Vacrian sensors tried to filter and interpret too much data, and the charged asteroids overwhelmed those filters. Human sensors were dumber but more direct, showing raw data that a skilled operator could read manually. The morning of the trial arrived with clear space and cold tension. The Infinite Horizon left Luna orbit with a minimal crew, Jake at the helm, Pete in engineering, and Claire at the navigation station. Lisa Hayes wanted to come, but regulations prohibited non-essential personnel during proving trials. She watched from the observation deck of Luna Station, her knuckles white as she gripped the railing. The Council's observation fleet was already waiting at the edge of the Keltar belt, 3 heavy cruisers maintaining a safe distance, their sensors trained on the approach vector. Jake recognized the lead ship as a Vacrian vessel, and he could imagine the crew aboard it sneering at the sight of their bastardized cruiser limping toward certain failure. The communication channel crackled with the voice of the trial coordinator, a bored-sounding official who recited the rules without any expectation that they mattered. Jake took a deep breath and guided the Infinite Horizon into the belt. The first asteroids appeared on sensors as ghostly blurs, their charged surfaces creating interference that would have blinded a standard Vacrian ship. But Claire's stripped-down displays showed them clearly enough, and she called out vectors in a calm voice that steadied Jake's nerves. The ship slipped between 2 massive rocks, and then they were inside the belt proper, surrounded by deadly obstacles on all sides. The next 3 hours were the most intense flying Jake had ever experienced. The asteroids did not just drift. They moved in patterns influenced by their electrical charges, pushing and pulling on each other in ways that were impossible to predict with automated systems. Claire read the raw sensor data and translated it into navigation instructions that Jake followed with absolute trust. Pete monitored the engines and power systems, calling out adjustments that kept them running at peak efficiency. The hybrid nature of the infinite horizon became its greatest advantage. The human components allowed for rapid improvisation that pure Vacrian systems could not match. When Claire spotted a pattern in the asteroid movements, Jake could respond instantly without waiting for computer confirmation. When the engines needed more power, Pete could reroute it from non-essential systems in seconds. The ship moved through the belt like it was dancing, finding spaces that the Council's computers said should not exist. Halfway through the belt, they hit a cluster of asteroids so dense that Claire could not find a clear path. Jake made a decision that would have gotten him expelled from any normal pilot training. He flew straight toward the largest asteroid and used its charged field to slingshot the ship around it at an angle that should have torn the hull apart. The infinite horizon's reinforced earth steel plating held where pure Vacrian materials would have buckled, and they shot through a gap that opened for exactly 3 seconds before slamming shut behind them. The Council observation ships went silent. Jake could imagine the analysts staring at their displays in disbelief, running calculations that said what they had just witnessed was impossible. But the infinite horizon kept moving, kept finding paths, kept proving that human stubbornness combined with alien technology could achieve things neither could do alone. They emerged from the far side of the Keltar belt after 2 hours and 47 minutes, nearly half the time most ships needed. Jake brought the infinite horizon to a stop and waited for the Council's response, his hands still trembling slightly from the intensity of the flight. Claire slumped in her chair with the exhausted grin. Pete let out a whoop of triumph from the engineering deck. The communication channel remained silent for a long moment. When it finally crackled to life, the trial coordinator's voice had lost its bored tone. The infinite horizon had passed the proving trial, and Earth's claim was hereby recognized. Jake was granted full certification as a vessel commander. The channel cut off abruptly, as if the coordinator could not bear to say more. Lisa's voice came through on a private Earth channel moments later, and she was laughing with a wild relief. They had done it. They had forced the Council to acknowledge that humanity could build and operate advanced vessels. She had already drafted a formal request for Earth to establish its own shipwright program, using the infinite horizon as a template and proof of concept. Jake guided his ship back toward Luna, feeling a satisfaction that went beyond personal achievement. The galaxy had spent centuries telling humanity they were not ready, that they needed to wait and learn and be grateful for scraps. But sometimes the best answer to being told something was impossible was simply to do it anyway, and let the results speak for themselves. The infinite horizon had become more than a repaired ship. It had become a symbol of what humanity could achieve when they stopped asking for permission and started building their own future. And Jake knew this was only the beginning. The explosion tore through the infinite horizon's starboard hull with a violence that sent Jake Morrison flying across the cargo bay. His pressure suit's automatic system saved his life in the 3 seconds it took for the emergency bulkheads to slam shut. But those 3 seconds felt like an eternity as he tumbled through space debris and watched his ship tear itself apart. The section he had been working in decompressed completely, venting atmosphere and equipment into the void before the internal doors could seal. Jake slammed against a support beam hard enough to crack 2 ribs, pain shooting through his chest as he gasped for air that his suit systems were struggling to provide. Emergency crews from Luna shipyards arrived within 6 minutes, their rescue shuttle locking onto Jake's beacon and pulling him to safety. He watched through the shuttle's viewport as the infinite horizon drifted with a gaping wound in its side, sparks and frozen gases still venting from the damaged section. 2 weeks after their triumph at the Keltar belt, someone had tried to destroy everything Jake had built. The medics wanted to sedate him for the trip back to Luna Station, but Jake refused, forcing himself to stay conscious and focused despite the pain. He needed to see the damage and understand what had happened. The investigation team arrived before Jake was even released from the medical bay. Commander Lisa Hayes personally led the inspection, bringing with her experts in explosives and station security. What they found made Jake's blood run cold. Someone had planted a military-grade plasma charge inside the housing for the newly installed fusion cell in Section 7. The charge had been set on a timer, designed to detonate during the maintenance shift when Jake would most likely be working in that area. If he had been standing 3 meters closer to the blast point, his pressure suit would not have saved him. The explosive signature was traced within hours. Vacrian military ordnance, the kind used for demolitions and controlled breaches. But that meant almost nothing in terms of finding the culprit. Dozens of species in the galaxy had access to Vacrian military equipment through black market channels or legitimate purchases. The Council expressed sympathy and offered compensation for the damage, a gesture that felt hollow and calculated. Lisa saw it clearly. If Jake accepted the money and scrapped the ship, the problem of Earth's upstart hybrid warship would disappear without the Council having to take direct action. Jake made his decision in the medical bay while his ribs were still being treated. He called Lisa and told her to move the Infinite Horizon immediately to the most secure facility Earth controlled. Lisa did not hesitate. Within 24 hours, the damaged ship was being carefully towed to Earth's primary Luna shipyards, the facility where humanity built its small fleet of system defense boats. The yards were protected by the best security Earth could provide, which was not much by galactic standards, but better than leaving the ship vulnerable to another attack. What happened next surprised Jake more than the explosion had. Lisa arrived at his recovery room with authorization codes that gave him access to resources he had never imagined. The Earth Defense Initiative had been quietly building a budget for advanced ship development, waiting for the right moment to use it. That moment was now. She brought him a full engineering team of 20 specialists, military-grade components that were still being unpacked from their shipping containers, and most importantly, protection. If anyone wanted to sabotage the Infinite Horizon again, they would have to get through Earth military security to do it. The repairs took 3 months, but Jake did not just rebuild what had been destroyed. He upgraded everything he could touch. The engineering team Lisa had provided came with ideas that made his original modifications look primitive. They had been studying the hybrid approach during the weeks after the Keltar trial, and they brought innovations that Jake had not considered. Chief Engineer Danny Walsh had designed a new power distribution system that could handle both human and Vacrian components with 90% efficiency. Weapons specialist Karen Price had adapted Earth's latest missile systems to work with the Infinite. Horizon's targeting computers, they reinforced the hull with layers of Earth-manufactured alloy that was heavier than the original Vacrian materials but far more resilient. The new armor added 15% to the ship's mass, but improved engine modifications compensated for the extra weight. They installed human weapon systems alongside the repaired Vacrian plasma cannons, giving the ship offensive capabilities that were unconventional but deadly. Earth's missiles were slower than plasma fire but could track targets and adjust their trajectory, something energy weapons could not do. Pete Douglas and Claire Martinez became permanent crew members, officially transferred to Earth Defense Initiative, with ranks and salaries that reflected their importance to the project. They were joined by 12 other volunteers from Earth's small military, young men and women who saw the Infinite Horizon as their chance to be part of something historic. The ship that had started as one man's project was becoming a real warship with a real crew. Training began as soon as the major repairs were complete. The crew had to learn to think in ways that neither pure human nor pure alien crews did. They studied both Earth naval tactics and captured Vacrian combat manuals, looking for ways to blend the two approaches. Claire developed navigation techniques that exploited the hybrid sensor systems. Karen trained gunners to use both plasma cannons and missile launchers in coordinated strikes. Danny taught everyone basic engineering so they could make repairs during combat, without needing to wait for specialists. The ship's computer system was completely rebuilt from the ground up, and this time Jake did not have to scavenge parts. They installed the latest Earth AI systems, programming them with adaptive algorithms that learned from crew input. The computer began to develop something that almost resembled personality, adjusting its responses based on who was giving commands and what situations they faced. The Infinite Horizon was becoming more than a vessel. It was becoming a thinking entity that evolved alongside its crew. 4 months after the explosion, the Infinite Horizon was ready for its first test flight since the repairs. Jake took the ship through maneuvers that would have torn the original version apart, pushing the engines and structure to their new limits. The upgraded hybrid systems performed beyond expectations. The ship was faster than before, tougher than before, and far more dangerous than before. What had started as a salvaged cruiser had transformed into something unprecedented in the galaxy. A true warship that represented neither human nor alien engineering, but something entirely new. the Council summoned Commander Lisa Hayes for a hearing about Earth's unauthorized military expansion. The charges were vague but threatening: violation of development protocols, misuse of salvage technology, operating unsafe vessels in Council space. Lisa prepared her defense carefully, knowing this was not really about regulations. This was about fear. The Council had maintained control over younger species by controlling access to advanced technology. Earth's hybrid approach threatened that control by showing that innovation mattered more than having the oldest or most refined systems. She brought Jake and the Infinite Horizon to the Council's orbital station for the hearing, a move that was legally questionable but politically brilliant. The hearing chamber was filled with representatives from 24 species, and they all fell silent when the rebuilt Infinite Horizon took position outside the station's main viewport. It was no longer the jury-rigged salvage craft that had scraped through the Keltar belt. It was a warship that looked like it meant business, its hull gleaming with new armor and its weapon systems clearly visible. Jake sat beside Lisa in the hearing chamber, wearing the Earth Defense Initiative uniform that still felt strange after months of working in coveralls. He watched the Council representatives study his ship through the viewport, seeing calculation in their eyes. Some saw opportunity, others saw threat, but none of them could deny what they were looking at. Humanity had taken their cast-off technology and forged it into something that demanded respect. The hearing was about to begin, and Jake knew the real battle was just starting. Ambassador Kelrith stood before the Council chamber like a tower of controlled fury, his Vacrian features expressing contempt that needed no translation. He was nearly 3 meters tall, his species' natural height advantage making him literally look down on the human representatives seated below. His voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of civilization as he listed the 17 separate violations of Council law that Earth had supposedly committed. The Infinite Horizon was a contaminated vessel, he declared, a mongrel creation that violated the sacred principles of technological purity that kept the galaxy functioning. He demanded its immediate confiscation and dismantling, with Jake Morrison's certification permanently revoked for crimes against proper engineering. Commander Lisa Hayes stood to respond, and though she was barely half the ambassador's height, her voice carried equal authority. Earth had broken no laws, she stated clearly. Jake had purchased legal salvage using his own credits. He had modified that salvage using technology that Earth owned and controlled. The ship was sovereign Earth property, built in Earth facilities by Earth citizens. The Council had no grounds for confiscation unless they were prepared to admit that humanity had fewer rights than other member species. The debate that followed stretched for 3 hours, with representatives from other species weighing in based on their own political calculations. The insectoid Threxians supported Earth's position, seeing opportunity in the precedent of hybrid technology. The aquatic Nereids opposed it, worried about maintaining traditional hierarchies. The silicon-based architects remained neutral, more interested in the technical achievement than the political implications. Jake sat through most of it in silence, watching his ship through the viewport and wondering how something as simple as repairing a broken vessel had become a galactic incident. Ambassador Kelrith finally addressed Jake directly, his translator rendering the Vacrian's words with cold precision. He called Jake a thief who had stolen Vacrian designs, a pretender who claimed to understand engineering that was beyond human capability, a dangerous fool who would get himself and his crew killed in a ship held together by primitive modifications. The insults were delivered in diplomatic language, but their meaning was clear. Jake stood slowly, his ribs still aching from the explosion 4 months ago. He had not planned to speak during the hearing, preferring to let Lisa handle the politics. But something in Kelrith's words demanded a response, and Jake found himself talking before he consciously decided to. He described finding the Infinite Horizon abandoned and forgotten in a salvage yard, declared worthless by the very civilization that had built it. He detailed every credit he had spent, money earned from years of honest work. He talked about the sleepless nights spent learning systems that nobody had bothered to teach him, about the moments of doubt when he wondered if he was wasting his life on an impossible dream. Then Jake asked the question that had been building in his mind since this whole conflict began. If the Infinite Horizon was truly worthless as the Council had declared when they sold it for scrap, why did they fear it now? If his modifications were primitive and dangerous, Why had the ship passed the Keltar proving trial that was designed to destroy it? If human engineering was so inferior, why was Ambassador Kelrith spending political capital to demand the ship's destruction, instead of simply letting it fail on its own? The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. Jake had voiced the contradiction that everyone understood but nobody wanted to acknowledge. The Council feared the Infinite Horizon not because it was dangerous to its crew, but because it was dangerous to their established order. It proved that younger species did not need to wait centuries for permission to advance. They could take what was available and build their own future. The answer to Jake's question came not from the Council, but from space itself. Emergency klaxons tore through the hearing chamber, their wailing cutting off all debate. Every representative reached for personal displays as sensor data flooded the station's networks. The Zarkon swarm had arrived at the edge of the system, 20 warships materializing from faster-than-light travel in a coordinated assault formation. The pirate fleet had been raiding outer colonies for 6 months, but nobody expected them to be bold or stupid enough to attack the Council's primary station. The Zarkon broadcast their demands on all frequencies. Surrender complete control of 3 colony systems or watch the station be destroyed. Their lead vessels began burning toward the station, weapons hot and shields raised. The Council's defense fleet scrambled to respond, but they had been caught completely unprepared. Their ships were scattered across the system on routine patrols, too far out to intercept in time. Estimated time for the defense fleet to reach defensive positions was 12 minutes. Estimated time until the Zarkon reached weapons range of the station was 8 minutes. Jake was already moving before Commander Hayes could give the order. He ran from the chamber toward the docking bay where his shuttle was waiting, his mind automatically calculating vectors and response times. The Infinite Horizon was less than 2 minutes away at full burn, its crew on standby because Jake never left his ship unmanned in potentially hostile territory. He reached the shuttle and launched with emergency protocols, the small craft's engine screaming as he covered the distance to his ship. Pete Douglas had the Infinite Horizon ready by the time Jake reached the bridge. Claire was already plotting intercept courses, her displays showing the Zarkon formation and their approach vectors. The rest of the crew took their stations with practiced efficiency, no questions asked and no hesitation shown. Karen Price armed all weapon systems, both the Vacrian plasma cannons and the Earth missile batteries. Danny Walsh pushed the engines to maximum output, ready to give Jake every bit of speed the hybrid systems could provide. Jake positioned the Infinite Horizon between the Council station and the Zarkon advance, one ship facing 20 in a confrontation that violated every tactical doctrine ever written. They were outnumbered and outgunned by any reasonable analysis. The Zarkon were professional raiders who had carved out a territory through violence and skill. Their ships were purpose-built warships, not salvaged cruisers held together by improvisation. But Jake had not rebuilt the Infinite Horizon to play it safe, and his crew had not volunteered to serve on it because they wanted easy assignments. The battle began when the Zarkon lead ship fired a warning shot that was not meant to miss. Jake rolled the Infinite Horizon through the plasma blast and returned fire with both cannons and missiles, using the hybrid weapon system to create attack patterns the raiders had never seen before. The Vacrian plasma cannons fired in rapid pulses while Earth missiles arced around them on curving trajectories, forcing the Zarkon to split their defensive attention. The lead ship took hits on its forward shield, damage that should not have been possible from a single light cruiser. The next 17 minutes became a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Jake used every advantage the hybrid design provided, combining human tactical thinking with Vacrian speed and maneuverability. He fought like no pure human or pure alien captain would fight, making decisions that looked insane until they worked. Claire found vectors through the Zarkon formation that conventional navigation computers would have rejected as too dangerous. Pete kept the engines running at levels that should have caused catastrophic failures, but somehow held together. The Infinite Horizon took damage that would have destroyed a standard vessel. Hull breaches opened on 3 decks, venting atmosphere until emergency bulkheads sealed. The engines ran so hot that their housing began to warp, but Danny somehow kept them functional. A Zarkon plasma bolt punched through the starboard armor and destroyed 2 crew quarters that were fortunately empty. But the ship kept fighting, kept moving, kept disrupting the Zarkon attack pattern. Jake disabled 3 Zarkon vessels outright, targeting their engine cores with missile strikes that the raiders' shields were not designed to stop. He forced 2 more to break formation, using maneuvers that brought him within meters of collision to get clean shots at vulnerable points. The Zarkon had expected an easy target or a quick retreat, but instead they found themselves fighting a ship that refused to follow predictable patterns. The Council's defense fleet arrived to find the Zarkon formation in disarray. Their neat attack run turned into a scattered mess by one human-modified cruiser. The raiders took one look at the reinforcements and made the smart choice, jumping to faster-than-light travel and retreating before they could be trapped. They left behind 3 disabled ships and a very confused Council. The Infinite Horizon limped back to the station's docking bay, trailing sparks and frozen gases. Jake guided her in with hands that had finally started shaking from adrenaline crash. His crew was exhausted and battered but alive. They had done something that should not have been possible, and everyone in the system had witnessed it through the sensor feeds that were already being analyzed and played. The Council chamber reconvened 6 hours later after emergency repairs had stabilized the station. There were no more accusations about unauthorized military development.